Hello and welcome to video 8 on the Basic Blender 2.80 course. This one is about curves and empties and how to use them together or separately. Now curves are a completely different type of objects from the meshes that you have seen so far. The meshes always consist of vertices and they consist of edges and they consist of faces. But when you go into curves, you have object vertices that are connected only through a mathematical representation of a curve between those 2 points. And then you have in every vertex you have 2 control vertices with which you can edit the form of the curve. So let's go ahead and go to the top view so that I don't mess up my Z direction. And Shift A, and all of these are meshes, but all of these are curves. You can have all kinds of things, and the things that I use the most are Bezier curves and Bezier circles, because NURBs are known as non-uniform rational B-splines. I have no clue what that means, but they can also be used when you are making really highly complex surfaces, for example. But for the purposes of my use, I will now enter a Bezier curve. It looks like this, and when I go into edit mode, you can see that it has 2 points. One point in here, another point in here. And whenever you select a point, you can also see the control points. Now, grabbing the actual vertex will move the whole thing. Grabbing any of these control points will keep the object vertex in place and enable you to edit the shape of the curve. Like so. Let me take this one here, move it closer, scale it down, rotate it on the Z-axis, place it here. And then I will extrude from here because it is just a vertex. You can extrude it and you can scale it, which you cannot do with any other type of vertex really. Rotate and then scale this one here. So I have a nice curve that looks a bit like a cine curve, but as you can see, it is in the XY plane. It doesn't have any volume to it. Actually, the only property it has is the length of the curve. It doesn't have any thickness. This won't show in a camera. If you go into a camera and you try to zoom close to it and try to see it, and you may even try getting a render of it, but you won't see anything because it doesn't have any other dimensions besides its length. However, when you now go to your object properties, object data properties, there's a new tab in here. This is the curve tab, and this allows you to govern how it actually looks and what happens to it. If you go to the geometry part and you here select the bevel, it will actually add thickness or a form to your mesh. And this is rather nice, and you can adapt, you can have it like with just a 4 or 6 or 7, or make it as round as you like using this. You can also define where the beveling starts or where the beveling ends, but have it like that is actually good. If you now go in here and you edit, you add another curve, or sorry, vertex. You can take it there and rotate it on the Z direction. So you can keep creating this tube endlessly by just extruding another vertex, rotating and scaling. Scaling this vertex here is going to make it look like so. And rotating this is going to make it turn that way. So this is one way of actually getting to see your object, how it's going to look. There is another way of doing this, and for showing that, I will go back to my top view and delete this object and add a Bezier circle. Now this is exactly the same, but it has 4 vertices and it has 8 control vertices, and they are evenly spaced and copies of each other, and that's why you have a complete perfect circle here. Now I will use a control or a bevel object to make this look different. So let's scale it up a little. Add another circle and edit this by pulling this in. Let's make it like so. Move it on the x-axis actually, like so. And I will rotate this. And I'll rotate that. Just for the heck of it. So this is how it now looks. I'll scale it down a little. Now if I select this curve here, and instead of saying depth, which would just make it a donut, I will say object and Bezier circle 1. Oh, that's big, so I'll scale down my object. Now you can see that my curve has taken on the form of this object here. If I were to change this by gx, like so, it makes the whole thing look very different. So you can basically make anything out of this. And the funny thing is that when you have done this and you have selected this object here, you can actually right click on it and say convert to mesh. And now you have a mesh from the form of the curve. You can now lose this because there's no connection anymore between the object and this bigger object here. So you can get pretty much any shape that you can make a curve for and then turn that into a mesh. This is actually rather useful in some places. So that's one nice way of doing things. The second thing I wanted to show you is how to use the curve as a modifier for a mesh. And to do that, I will first add a mesh and make it a cube and scale it first completely, then scale it on the x direction. Now, to make this object able to bend, you have to add lots of edge loops for it, something like that. Now it's able to bend. Place it there, like so. Okay, then I will go back to my Z view and add the curve as a separate object. Actually, you cannot add a curve into a mesh in edit mode, so this is safe in that sense. Move it on the x-axis, on the y-axis a little. And then I will just, for the sake of argument, I will extrude another vertex there and rotate it like so. So this is that I want my object here to adapt this curve. Now, one thing that you need to do is to make the last vertex or the first vertex of your curve the origin. So you snap the cursor to selected and object mode, set origin to 3D cursor. And here as well, go here, select the end of your object, snap the cursor to it, and set the origin to 3D cursor. Okay, now we're set. In the modifiers here, you have a thing called curve. So now that you have selected your object, and it's always a good idea to apply transforms before trying to use modifiers on it, you can now add a curve modifier to it. Here you can see the object, which is your Bezier curve, and your deformation axis is the one that actually defines what's going to happen to your object. So you need to keep clicking on these until you find the one that you need. So it seems that -x is the one that we are using. So if you now scale this thing like so, and then move this along your x-axis, you can see how it takes on the shape of the curve. Now it's weird that you're moving it along the x-axis and it slithers like a snake around the screen, but that's because the modifier is now working with the curve and with the mesh. So when you move it on the x, it will go where the curve says it tells it to go, and if you move it on the y, it will move up and down. If you move it on the z, it's going to move sideways, and this is where things get really hairy. So I wouldn't do that. And if you scale this down, you can see how it affects the curve. And if you scale this on the x direction, it will just do it along the curve. For this, I actually have found some uses at some point, so you may want to have a look at that as well. And the third thing I need to show you is how to use empties, and then how to use a curve to create a rather complex shape. So I will now take a new file, don't save, and turn on the screencast keys once more. So I will lose this. Oh, actually, I don't want to lose that first, because I want to show you how an empty looks. So whenever you click somewhere and you have moved your cursor, you can go Shift A, and then you can have empties. Now you can have a plane axis, or arrows, or single arrow, a circle, a cube, a sphere, or cone, or an image. Now the thing is that all of these are real objects. They are points in space, but they will not show up in any renders. So you can add as many as you need. I'll just add a plane axis there, because the way you use this actually is like so. You go to your object and you find a vertex. Then you add a cube, an empty here after you snap the cursor to it. Cursor to selected. Snap. Okay. And then you add an empty, plane axis empty. Oh, sorry, I moved my cursor away. Cursor to selected, and then Shift A, and add an arrows type of thing. I'll lose that. So in this corner now I have an empty, and if I do another one here, snap the cursor to that, go out of edit mode, add an empty with an arrows on it. I can now take out the cube, and those two places show me where I used to have my cube. Those are the top corners. Of course, it would be a good idea to add one here in the bottom corner as well. Yeah. Cursor to selected, and add an empty with arrows on it. So now it's safe to lose the cube, because I can always come back and place a cube so that one of the corners matches these corners. So empties are placeholders in the 3D space that you have. But they also have one more really interesting use, and that is how to use them as background images. First, I'll snap the cursor to the world origin. Then I will add an empty, but this time I will add one that says image. Add an empty object to the scene image, and even though it looks like a square, it doesn't actually show up in renders. Even if I add an image by going here into the empty object data properties and open an image from my background images, and Alt and Vase, everybody recognizes this. It now has the background that I can then scale. And if I wanted to make this vase, it would be really hard to do starting from vertices, because you would have a whole bunch of vertices going around that very complex outline. So it's easier to go top view and add first take this down just a little, G on the Z, so that it's not on the horizontal level. Go back to my top view and add a curve, this time a circle. Scale it up and go into edit mode. Now I can take these vertices and move them here. Move this one here. And then by grabbing and moving these points, I can make the curve go pretty closely to where I want to have my corners. And when I have two of these selected, this one and this one and this one, I can right click and say subdivide, which gives me an extra vertex here that I can then move and scale. And I need another one. Right clicking, subdividing, rotate this, move it closer to here, move this one here. So you can also already see that by doing just this, not much more than just moving a few vertices around, scaling them, I'm getting the shape of the object rather nicely. This one and this one need to be subdivided a couple of times. Or maybe just one. Yep. And rotate, scale, grab, whoops, grab, and scale. Yep. This one goes in here somewhere. Scale it up. Okay, and this one needs to be split. Subdivide, grab. So I'm just doing a little, moving these control vertices around. You can select both of them if you want. And okay, this one needs to be split a few times. So it's always just a right click and a subdivide. And then you just move it around. Grab this one and bring it there. Grab this one and bring it here. So you see it's already taking shape rather nicely. Just a little shaping needed here. Okay, just for the sake of argument, I'll leave it there. I think it's close enough for my purposes. And now I can either keep the empty with the image and the background if I want to, or I can, this one I have to fix that. You see the danger there is that if you're not in the top view and you start moving these around, you will wind up moving your stuff in the Z direction, and that is not what you want by far. Okay, I'll leave it at that. You could do endless tweaking here if you wanted to, but I think that's fine for my purposes. So while I'm in object mode, I can right click on that and say convert to mesh. And now I have these vertices. I'll hide the empty. These vertices that are pretty much the outline that I wanted to have. And since this is now a mesh, I can select everything and add a face, like so. And since it's a mesh, I can take the outline and extrude up and scale not in the Z direction, because all of these alto vases, they come out a little, and then I can lose the top top face, only faces, and now I have the bottom is there, the sides are there, and it's ready to be given a new modifier known as solidify. And with this you can set the thickness of your vase. I'll just make it not that thick. But as soon as I apply this, I have a nice vase with all of these vertices available to me. I can then either just give it a material, make it like I'll just show you how it looks later. But before that, I will actually use another modifier, apply this, and then add a modifier called Subdivision Surface, which is going to ruin my thing at first. But as you remember from the other parts, by adding some, my computer just went really slow for some reason. I don't know why. By adding a couple of loop rings, yay, this is going to be fun. I hope it doesn't crash. I'll have to be careful with this now. Adding a few loop rings is going to help you get the form back into shape. Whoa. This is not what you want to have when you're doing a tutorial. Just one more, and this will just prove the point. I'm not going to do this any further than that. And one for the inside, or a couple for the inside actually. I have to wait again until my computer wakes up. And then I can move it down. And another one. Just to get the inside seam straight. There are other ways of doing this, by the way. This is not the only one, but I'm used to this, so I will do this. It's easier for me. Okay. Then I will add a plane again as the floor. Size it up 100 times. Give that some sort of bluish material. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Go in here and turn it on. And then give this one a green glass material. Slightly darker, yeah. And then let's see how it looks in the camera. The camera is not looking at it properly. Okay. Well, let's do a quick one with this. Well, the lamp is inside our object. So I will just do a couple of quick planes in here to give us the whoa, it's stuck again. This isn't going to be good. Okay, back in here. Add a plane. Grab it on the Z direction. Scale it up a little. And give it a nice emission material. Emission with a strength of 5. And see how it looks when it's rendered. It's not giving enough light. It's not giving enough light here either. Okay, so why don't I just grab these and give them a couple of those instead. And now if you go to your material here and give it a color and move your render engine to be cycles, yeah, this is going to look nice when we do a render. So why don't I start the render and pause the recording and show you how it looks when it's done. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Just press F12 and pause the recording. And we're back with 8 minutes of rendering time on my laptop. Any real desktop with a separate graphics card would only take you about maybe a minute to do this. But anyway, that is the end result of the workflow from a curve to a vase to the curve to mesh conversion. Yes, this would be everything for this video. Thanks again for watching.